Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into roughly 2,000 years of London's completely wild, tumultuous history. We're going to uncover exactly how constant catastrophes, devastating invasions, and honestly, total destruction didn't break this place, but actually built the global metropolis we know today. You know, if you stand on any street corner in London right now, you'll hear a dozen different languages in a matter of minutes. It's this massive, bustling, thriving hub of humanity. But how exactly did it get that way? Well, let's kick things off with a staggering number. Nearly 40% of modern Londoners were born outside the UK. It's literally one of the most diverse cities on Earth. But to really wrap our heads around this vibrant diversity, we've got to rewind. We have to go back 2 millennia, to what was essentially a deserted, muddy, tidal marshland along a river. It was completely strategically useless to just about anyone, except, of course, the Romans. Okay, let's look at the timeline and see how this all builds. Starting in 43 AD, 4 Roman legions land on the coast and push inland looking for the absolute lowest crossing point on the Thames. They find it, and they set up what quickly becomes a booming trading post, Londinium. Merchants and soldiers are just flocking there. But skip ahead just 17 years and disaster strikes. Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe is totally fed up with the Roman occupation, so she marches her army right up to the city and just burns it completely to the ground. Now, the Romans eventually rebuild it, even bigger, with a massive defensive wall, but by 410 AD, the Roman Empire itself is crumbling, right? So they pull their legions out, the trade networks totally collapse, and Londinium is essentially just abandoned to the ruins.
And honestly, this is wild. This brilliantly illustrates just the sheer absolute devastation of Queen Boudica's revenge. To this day, archaeologists can literally dig up a thick layer of red ash from when she burned Londinium down. It's actual physical proof of total annihilation, just sitting right beneath the feet of modern Londoners.
So moving on, a couple of centuries later, the Saxons start settling the area. But here's the funny thing. They completely avoided the old Roman walled city. They were farmers, right? They were so baffled by these massive, towering stone structures left behind by the Romans that they genuinely thought the place was haunted. They literally called the ruins the work of giants. Now, what's really interesting here is the contrast. Because they were so spooked by the Roman ruins, the Saxons built a brand new, completely unprotected trading town about a mile away called Londonwick, right around where Covent Garden is today. But because it was totally exposed out in the open, Norse raiders and Vikings just kept casually sailing up the Thames and sacking the place. They destroyed it in 842 and then again in 851. It wasn't until 886 that King Alfred the Great finally stepped in with a brilliant fix. He abandoned Londonwick and essentially forced everyone to move back behind the safety of those old, spooky Roman walls, creating Londonburg, or London Fortress.
For a while, the city bounced back and forth between Saxon and Danish rulers. But then, in 1042, a massive geographical shift happens. Edward the Confessor decides to build Westminster Abbey just to the west of the city walls. And that one single decision, it forever split London's geography into 2 distinct worlds that we still see today. The city, as the bustling hub for commerce and finance, and Westminster as the absolute center for royal and political power. Which brings us directly to a year that changed literally everything. 1066. In January, Edward the Confessor dies without an heir, kicking off this incredibly chaotic succession crisis. Harold Godwinson gets the crown, but almost immediately he has to fight off a massive Norwegian invasion up north. He barely catches his breath, and boom, William the Conqueror's Norman forces land in the south. Harold rushes his completely exhausted army down to meet them, and in October, at the Battle of Hastings, Harold is killed. By Christmas Day, William is crowned at Westminster Abbey. And just like that, the Anglo-Saxon era is officially over.
Now, William didn't exactly trust the locals. I mean, they had just fought for his rival, right? So to keep this untrustworthy population in check, he immediately starts building fortresses. The most famous one, the Tower of London. Its central keep, the White Tower, was a massive statement in stone. We're talking walls up to 90 feet high and an insane 12 feet thick. It was explicitly designed to dominate the skyline, serving as a permanent, incredibly intimidating reminder of exactly who was in charge now. So, over the next few centuries, medieval London grows. It gets incredibly wealthy, but also incredibly cramped and chaotic, with powerful merchant guilds basically running the show. But we have to ask a big question here. How does a thriving, deeply crowded city, packed wall-to-wall with timber houses and open sewers, survive the sudden arrival of infected fleas? Well, as this chart shows, barely.
In 1348, the Black Death arrives on merchant ships, bringing rats carrying that deadly bacteria, and it was absolute devastation. Within just 2 years, it brutally wiped out a third to a half of London's entire 80,000-person population. I mean, entire streets were just left completely empty. The dead were piling up so fast that they had to dig these massive mass graves out in the fields beyond the city walls.
But remarkably, the city claws its way back. And the next big expansion? It's actually completely accidental. In the 1530s, King Henry VIII wants a divorce. The Pope says no. So Henry selfishly breaks with Rome, shuts down all the local Catholic monasteries, and straight up seizes their massive land holdings. Then he turns around and sells all that prime real estate off to wealthy aristocrats. They start building these grand houses, and suddenly, almost overnight, London has the physical room it needs to trigger a massive building boom.
Okay, but that rapid expansion comes to a screeching halt in the 1660s. Talk about the ultimate back-to-back catastrophes. First up, 1665, a horrific plague returns. It basically traps the poor who couldn't afford to flee, killing a staggering 100,000 people. That's a full quarter of the city. Then, literally the very next year, September 1666, a tiny spark in a bakery on Pudding Lane ignites. Because the whole city is this dense tinderbox of timber houses, a 4-day fire quickly spirals out of control. It completely destroys 85% of the medieval wooden city. We're talking 13,000 houses gone. But here is the craziest part. Miraculously, only about 6 people actually died in the blaze itself.
So, London literally uses the ashes to adapt. The famous architect Christopher Wren pitches this grand, enlightened city plan with wide-open boulevards, but property rights were a nightmare, so they rejected his layout. However, they did pass strict new building codes. No more timber, they mandated brick and stone to make it fireproof. And while Wren didn't get his fancy street grid, he did get the gig of a lifetime, spending the next 35 years crowning the city skyline with the iconic, magnificent dome of the new St. Paul's Cathedral.
And then, boom. The sheer, unstoppable scale of the Industrial Revolution hits. Factories, railways, mass production, the immense wealth of a global empire just pours into the city. Just look at this growth. It transforms London from a city of 1 million people in 1801 to a staggering 6.5 million by 1901. It literally became the largest city in the world.
But Victorian London was deeply, brutally unequal. You had this violent contrast. On one hand, the unimaginable, extraordinary wealth of the British Empire showing up in ritzy neighborhoods like Mayfair and Belgravia. On the other hand, the desperate, crushing poverty of the East End slums. We're talking child labor in factories, horrifying workhouses, the literal terror of Jack the Ripper, and these frequent, completely deadly outbreaks of cholera that would wipe out entire streets.
So the real game changer in fixing this squalor came from a doctor named John Snow. In 1854, he finally proves that deadly cholera was spreading through the contaminated drinking water, not through bad air like everyone previously thought. This was absolutely crucial. It paved the way for massive public health overhauls, most famously the modern sewage system built to channel all that waste away from the Thames. And get this, parts of that system are still in use today.
So by the time we hit the 20th century, London is this engineering marvel, right? It's got the world's first subway system, towering bridges, the whole shebang. But again, we have to ask, how does a city survive when modern warfare brings the fight directly to its doorstep? When complete devastation is literally dropping from the skies right onto its residential neighborhoods?
The answer came during the absolute terror of the Second World War. During the Blitz, from late 1940 to mid-1941, German bombers pounded London almost every single night. Entire districts were utterly leveled. 1 million buildings were either damaged or completely destroyed. By the end of the conflict, with nearly 500,000 UK souls lost in the war, post-war London was left utterly exhausted, totally broke, and buried under mountains of rubble. But you know London by now. It refused to die. It rebuilt yet again. The 1951 Festival of Britain really signaled this fresh, optimistic beginning. Bold, brutalist concrete towers started rising straight up from the rubble. And crucially, absolutely crucially, essential new waves of immigration arrived. You had the Windrush generation arriving from the Caribbean starting in 1948, followed by folks from India, Pakistan, and all over the globe, stepping in to breathe vital life, culture, and energy back into this exhausted city.
Let's jump back to the timeline, because this constant reinvention just keeps accelerating into the modern era. We bounced from the massive cultural explosion of swinging London in the 60s, think the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, straight into the 1980s, where the completely abandoned, neglected Docklands were transformed into the gleaming global financial hub of Canary Wharf. And that evolution shoots straight through to 2012, when the Olympics brought billions in investment and sweeping infrastructure changes to East London.
That continuous, unyielding cycle, absolute disaster followed by brilliant adaptation, is exactly why today over 300 different languages are spoken across London's incredibly diverse neighborhoods. It is a city built on layers and layers of history, where every single tragedy has just forced it to pull in new people with fresh ideas to rebuild it stronger than before. As we wrap up this explainer, I think the undeniable takeaway here is that disaster isn't the end of London. It's the exact thing that forces it to evolve. It forces the city to adapt and pull in fresh energy. From a marshy bog to the heart of an empire, straight through fire, plague, and bombs, London survives. So, looking back at all this history, what do you think this indestructible city's next great evolution will look like? Thanks so much for joining me on this journey, and keep asking those big questions.